I saw the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in battle, and it was not a Balrog. It was something I had no name for, something that should not exist. It looked like an orc, moved like an orc, led an army of orcs, but it was not an orc. It was something wearing an orc's shape the way you or I might wear a cloak, something vast and terrible compressed into a form of mockery and hate. And when King Thingol killed it, when Aranrúth pierced its heart and it fell, I saw what happened. I saw what left the body, and I understood that we had not killed an orc captain. We had killed something far older, far more dangerous, something that chose to degrade itself into that twisted form. I am Celegorn, a warrior of Doriath, and I fought in the Battle of the North Marches. And I am telling you now what I saw, what we faced, and what it means that Morgoth has servants who are not orcs or trolls or corrupted beasts, but lesser powers of the world itself, twisted into shapes of horror to lead his armies. Let me tell you about the Baldogs, and why they are nearly as terrifying as the Balrogs themselves. My name is Celegorn. I have served in the armies of Doriath for 3 centuries, fighting in the long war against Morgoth that has consumed the First Age. I am a common soldier, not a captain, not a lord, just a warrior who stands in the shield wall and holds the line when darkness comes from the north. And I have seen many terrible things in those 3 centuries. I have fought orcs by the thousands. I have faced trolls in battle. I have seen the corrupted creatures that Morgoth breeds in his pits and sends against us, and I have learned to recognize them, to understand their capabilities, to know what we face and how to fight it. But what I saw leading the orc host at the North Marches, I had never seen before, and I hope I never see its like again. The warning came on a cold morning in early spring. Scouts returning from the north, riding hard, their horses lathered and exhausted. They reported to King Thingol immediately, and within the hour the bells were ringing. The full muster. Every warrior in Doriath called to arms. This was not a raid, not a small incursion. This was an army, a host of orcs numbering in the thousands, driving south through Dorthanion, heading straight for our borders. And they were moving fast, faster than orcs normally move, as if they were being driven by something, or led by something that would not tolerate delay. I assembled with my company under the command of Captain Mablung, one of Thingol's greatest warriors. Mablung was a veteran of countless battles, calm and steady, the kind of leader who inspired confidence simply by being present. But that morning, I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Concern, real concern. And when he spoke to us, his voice was grave. The scouts report something unusual about this host, he said. They are led by a captain, an orc captain, they think, but larger than any orc they have seen. And the orcs follow it with a fear that is not natural. Stay close, stay disciplined, and if you see this captain, do not engage alone. We do not yet know what we face. That should have been my first warning. Mablung did not speak of things he did not understand, unless they truly worried him. But I was young and confident. I had fought orcs for 3 centuries, and I didn't fear them. I thought this was just another battle, just another defense of our borders. I was wrong. We marched north to meet the threat. King Thingol led us personally, riding at the head of the host, with Mablung and Beleg, his 2 greatest captains, at his sides. And behind them came the full might of Doriath. Thousands of elves, armed and armored, moving with the discipline and purpose of warriors who had fought together for centuries. We were not afraid. We were Eathrim, the people of the Girdle, protected by the power of Melian and led by a king who had never been defeated in battle. We would meet this orc host, and we would destroy it, as we had destroyed so many before. We reached the North Marches 2 days later, the border of Doriath, where the enchantment of the girdle of Melian met the wild lands beyond. And there we prepared, set our lines, positioned archers on the high ground, readied ourselves for battle. And we waited. And as we waited, I began to feel something wrong. The air was cold, colder than it should be for spring. And there was a smell. Not the normal smell of orcs, which is foul enough, but something else. Something like burning. Like metal heated too hot. Like the air before a lightning strike. And I saw other warriors noticing it too, shifting uncomfortably, checking their weapons, feeling the same wrongness I felt. And then we saw them. The orc host, emerging from the pass of Anak, pouring down from the highlands like a dark flood. Thousands of them, more than I had ever seen in one place. And the first thing I noticed was that they were different. They moved in formation, actual formation, ranks and files like a proper army. Orcs do not do that. Orcs mob, orcs swarm. They fight as individuals driven by fear and hunger. But these orcs marched, kept spacing, responded to drum signals that echoed across the field. Someone had trained them, disciplined them, turned them into something more dangerous than orcs usually were. And at their head, visible even at a distance, was the thing that made my heart go cold. It was tall, impossibly tall. I have fought orcs for 3 centuries, and the largest I have ever seen stood perhaps 6 feet. This thing was 8 feet at least, maybe 9. It towered over the orcs around it like an adult among children, and it was massive, broad-shouldered. The armor it wore was black plate, not the crude scavenged mail that orcs usually cobble together. This was forged, crafted. Each piece fitted perfectly to a body that was too large and too perfectly proportioned to be an orc, and it carried a spear. The weapon caught my attention immediately because it was wrong. Orcs use crude weapons, bent swords, chipped axes, spears made from scavenged wood and sharpened metal. But this spear was a work of craft. The shaft was perfectly straight, dark wood, 8 feet long, and the head was iron. Not crude iron, forged iron, shaped and sharpened and polished until it gleamed even in the dim light. This was a weapon made by someone who understood metalwork, who understood balance and weight and killing, and no orc had made it. The thing walked at the head of the host with a stride that was wrong. Orcs skulk, orcs creep. They move with the gait of creatures that expect to be struck. But this thing walked upright, confident, as if it owned the ground it walked on, as if it had every right to be there and we were the intruders. And I saw the orcs around it, saw how they moved. They did not press close to their leader, the way orcs usually do with their captains. They gave it space, a wide circle, as if they feared to get too near. And when it gestured, they responded immediately. No hesitation, no argument, just instant obedience born of terror. I heard murmuring in the ranks around me, other warriors seeing what I was seeing. "What is that?" someone whispered. I recognized the voice. Thorin, a veteran who had fought for 4 centuries. If he was uncertain, we were in trouble. "An orc?" another warrior replied, but his voice was doubtful. "Too big," Thorin said, "and look at how it moves. And that is not how orcs move." "Maybe a troll," someone else suggested. "No," Mablung's voice cut through the speculation. He had ridden up behind us, was staring at the approaching host with narrowed eyes. "Trolls do not lead, do not organize. That thing is commanding them, controlling them. I have never seen anything like it." And it was true. As the host advanced, I could see the patterns. The thing would raise its spear, and the drums would change rhythm. The orcs would shift formation. It would point, and a section of the host would peel off, move to flank. This was not an orc horde. This was an army, led by something that understood strategy, that understood warfare at a level orcs simply did not possess, and the wrongness of it made my skin crawl. Thingol rode forward to the front of our lines. He sat his horse for a long moment, studying the approaching enemy, and then he turned to Mablung and Beleg and spoke quietly. I was close enough to hear. "That is no orc," he said. His voice was certain, grim. "I do not know what it is, but it is not hot an orc." Mablung nodded slowly. "I have heard stories, from the early days of the war, of orc captains that were different, larger, more dangerous, but I have never seen one." Beleg leaned forward in his saddle. "What do we do?" Thingol's jaw tightened. His hand went to Aranrúth at his side. "We fight, as we always fight, but pass the word. No one engages that thing alone. Whatever it is too dangerous." And Mablung and Beleg rode down the lines, passing the order, and the word spread. "Do not engage the tall one alone. Stay in formation. Fight together." And I felt the mood of our army shift. We had come here confident, ready to break another orc host. But now there was uncertainty, because we could all see that thing at the head of their army, could all feel that it was wrong, and we did not know what we were facing. The orc host advanced to perhaps 300 yards, and then it stopped. The drums fell silent, and the tall figure stepped forward. Alone, it planted its spear in the ground and stood there, waiting. And I got my first clear look at its face, and I wished I had not, because the face was orc. The features were orc features, twisted, brutal, the skin grey and rough like bark, the teeth sharp and yellow. But everything was too perfect. The proportions were exact, as if someone had designed the ideal orc and then built it to specifications. And the eyes were wrong. They did not have the dull malice of orc eyes. They burned, not with fire, but with intelligence, with purpose, with something that looked like hate but was colder, more refined. This thing was not an animal. It was thinking, planning, and it was looking directly at Thingol. And then it spoke. The voice carried across the battlefield, loud, clear, resonant in a way that no orc voice should be. It spoke in the black speech, the language of Mordor and Angband, harsh syllables that hurt to hear, but the voice itself was wrong, too powerful, too controlled. It filled the air, made the ground seem to vibrate, and every orc on the field stopped moving and turned to look at their leader, and it raised one arm, pointed its spear at Thingol, and it spoke again. And this time I understood some of the words through context and tone. A challenge. It was challenging our king to single combat. The battlefield went silent. Thousands of warriors on both sides, all of us watching, waiting to see what Thingol would do. And I saw him exchange a glance with Mablung, saw the unspoken question. Should we accept, or should we refuse? Bury this thing under weight of numbers? Because we could. We had thousands of warriors. We could surround it, cut it down through sheer force. But I also saw something else in Thingol's face. Pride and determination. He was a king, and he had never refused a challenge, and he was not going to start now. Thingol urged his horse forward, rode to the front of our lines, and he called back in a voice that rang clear across the field, in Sindarin, accepting the challenge. And the thing that had challenged him tilted its head, and I swear I saw its lips pull back in something that might have been a smile. And it pulled its spear from the ground, and the orcs pulled back, and our warriors pulled back, and a space opened in the center of the battlefield, perhaps 50 yards across, and Thingol dismounted, drew Aranrúth, the ancient blade gleaming in the light, and he walked forward to meet his challenger. I will never forget that duel. I have seen many battles, many single combats. I have watched warriors who had trained for centuries face each other in tests of skill and strength, but I have never seen anything like what I witnessed that day. Thingol was one of the greatest warriors of the elves, had lived since before the sun rose, had fought in wars that were legend before I was born, and he moved with the grace and precision of someone who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of combat. But the thing he faced was his equal. They began slowly, circling, each studying the other, looking for weaknesses, for patterns. Thingol held Aranrúth in a high guard, shield ready. The thing held its spear with both hands, the point tracking Thingol's movement. And then Thingol struck, a testing blow, fast but not committed, Aranrúth cutting toward the thing's midsection, and the spear moved, knocked the sword aside with the shaft, the sound of metal on wood ringing across the field, and the thing countered, the spear point darting toward Thingol's shoulder, and Thingol's shield came up, deflected the thrust, and they separated, circled again, and I saw Thingol's expression change, just slightly, because that exchange had told him something. The thing was fast as he was, and skilled. The parry had been perfect, the counter-thrust precise. This was not going to be easy. This was going to be a real fight, against something that moved like a warrior who had trained for lifetimes. And that should not have been possible. Orcs do not train. Orcs fight with instinct and rage, but this thing fought with technique, with discipline, with skill that was innate, as if combat was written into its very essence. They engaged again, this time more committed. Thingol attacked with a combination, sword high, then low, then a shield bash to create space, and the thing defended perfectly, spear blocking high, then low, then stepping back to avoid the shield, and it countered again, the spear becoming a blur, multiple strikes in rapid succession, toward the legs, the chest, the face, and Thingol defended, sword and shield working together, deflecting, parrying. But he was being pushed back. The thing was attacking with relentless pressure, not giving him time to counter, and I saw sweat on Thingol's face, saw him breathing hard. This was not how these fights usually went. Usually Thingol dominated, but he was struggling against something that wore the shape of an orc. The duel intensified. They moved across the open ground, each seeking advantage. Thingol trying to get inside the spear's reach where his sword would be more effective. The thing maintaining distance, using the spear's length to keep Thingol at bay. And the spear was everywhere, striking from impossible angles, the point seeking gaps in Thingol's defense, the shaft sweeping low to trip him, the butt end striking high to force his shield up. This thing was not just fighting, it was using every part of its weapon, every technique, everything it knew. And what it knew was terrifying. Thingol changed tactics, feinted toward the thing's left side, and when the spear moved to block, he pivoted, came in from the right, Aranrúth cutting toward the ribs where the armor did not fully cover. And the thing twisted. The spear shaft blocked the blow, but the force of Thingol's strike was tremendous. The wood cracked, just slightly, and the thing hissed, not in pain, in recognition. Thingol had found a weakness. The spear was wood, could be broken, and now both fighters knew it. The thing became more aggressive, pressing the attack before Thingol could exploit the damage. The spear struck with greater force, greater speed, and I saw Thingol's shield begin to splinter. saw the paint crack, the wood beneath showing through. The thing was powerful. Each strike carried weight that dented the shield. That would have broken bone if it connected directly. And it was not tiring, was not slowing, was fighting with the same intensity it had started with. And Thingol was beginning to fatigue, just slightly, just enough that his movements were a fraction slower, his counters a moment later. And the thing noticed, pressed harder. And then Thingol nearly died. The thing changed its attack pattern. The spear struck high. Thingol raised his shield to block, and the thing released the spear with one hand, let it slide through its grip, extended the reach by 3 feet, and the point came under the shield, drove toward Thingol's leg, and only Thingol's reflexes saved him. He twisted. The spear point scraped along his thigh armor, tore through the mail underneath, drew blood. First blood. And the thing pulled back, reset its grip, and I saw it smile again. That terrible smile that did not belong on an orc face. Thingol looked down at his leg, at the blood running down his armor, and when he looked up, his expression had changed. The calculation was gone, the tactical thinking replaced by something colder, harder. He had been testing this thing, trying to understand it. But now he understood. It was dangerous, nearly as dangerous as any foe he had ever faced. And if he wanted to win, he would have to commit, fully, risk everything. And I saw him make that decision, saw him shift his stance, lower his center of gravity, prepare for the final exchange. They came together again, but this time there was no circling, no testing. Thingol attacked with everything he had. Aranrúth became a blur of motion, cutting high and low, stabbing toward gaps, the shield smashing forward to create openings, and the thing defended. But for the first time, it was being pushed back. The spear was fast, but Thingol's assault was faster. More varied, more desperate. He was not trying to win cleanly anymore. He was trying to survive, to create a single opening, a single moment when he could strike. And the thing made a mistake. Just one. The spear thrust toward Thingol's chest, a powerful thrust, committed, and Thingol did not block with his shield. Instead, he twisted, let the spear pass by his right side, so close it tore his cloak, and he dropped his shield, used both hands on Aranrúth, and he struck, a single perfect cut, diagonal, toward the thing's neck where the armor didn't cover, and the thing tried to pull back, tried to disengage, but it had overextended. The spear thrust had gone too far, and Thingol's blade was faster. Aranrúth caught the thing at the base of the neck, above the collarbone. The blade bit deep, and black blood sprayed. But the thing did not fall. It staggered, dropped the spear, and its hand went to the wound, and it looked at Thingol, and I saw shock in its eyes, real shock, as if it had not believed it could be hurt, as if it had thought itself invincible. And Thingol stepped forward, brought Aranrúth around in a second cut, this one toward the heart, under the armpit where armor could not cover, and the blade went in to the hilt, and Thingol twisted, felt for the heart, found it, and the thing gasped, a sound like air escaping a punctured bellows, and its eyes went wide, and it fell, first to its knees, then forward, face first into the mud, and Thingol stood over it, breathing hard, Aranrúth dripping black blood. And for a moment, there was absolute silence on the battlefield. And then I saw it, the thing, the body. It began to change, not dramatically, not melting or transforming, but subtly. The color was wrong, the flesh was becoming darker, harder, as if it were turning to stone. And there was light. I saw light coming from the wounds, not blood light. something else. Something that flickered and pulsed like a flame in wind, and it was rising, coming up from the body, a shape that had no clear form, like smoke, like mist, but brighter, and it hovered over the corpse for perhaps 3 seconds, and then it was gone, just gone, snuffed out like a candle, or fled. I could not tell which, but what remained on the ground was just a body, empty. The thing that had animated it was gone. I looked around. I saw other warriors staring, saw the same shock and confusion on their faces, because we had all seen it, all seen something leave the body, something that was not blood, not breath, something else, and we didn't understand what we had witnessed. Thingol stood over the corpse for a moment longer. Then he turned, walked back toward our lines, and he did not look back, did not acknowledge what had just happened, just walked, and we opened ranks to let him through, and the silence held, and then the Orc host broke. They saw their leader fall, saw the duel end, and they panicked. Orcs are brave when they think they will win, when they outnumber the enemy. But when they lose their leaders, when their advantage disappears, they flee. And these Orcs fled, dropped their weapons, scattered into the wild lands. And we pursued, or cut them down as they ran, drove the remnants back into the forests of Taur Nufuin, and we won the day. But it felt hollow, because we still did not understand what we had faced. After the battle, Mablung organized a detail to examine the body, and I was part of it. We approached carefully, as if the thing might rise again. But it did not move, did not breathe. It was dead, truly dead. We stripped off the armor, black plate, each piece perfectly fitted, forged with skill that matched the best elfsmiths. And beneath was the body, and up close, the wrongness was even more apparent. The skin looked like orc skin, grey and rough, but it was too uniform, too perfect, as if someone had designed exactly what orc skin should look like, and then replicated it with precision. And there was a mark, carved into the chest, or above where the heart would be. In a script I did not recognize, strange symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long. Mablung studied the mark for a long time, and his face grew pale, and he called for one of the older warriors, one of the veterans who had fought in the earliest days of the war. And they conferred quietly, and then Mablung stood and addressed those of us who had gathered. This was not an orc, he said. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard. This was a Maia, a spirit, one of the lesser powers that served Morgoth before the sun rose, and it took this form, this degraded, twisted form, to lead the Orcs, to serve the enemy. The words did not make sense, could not make sense. Maia were divine, were spirits of light and song and power. How could one become an Orc? Why would one? And I asked, we all asked. And Mablung explained. They do it by choice. Morgoth offers them power, authority over his armies, the ability to command, and they accept. They degrade themselves willingly, take forms of mockery, to show their contempt for the elves, for men, for everything the Valar created. They become the thing they despise most, not because they are forced, but because they choose to. Because in Morgoth's service, degradation is strength, mockery is loyalty, and these spirits prove their devotion by becoming monsters. I looked at the corpse, at the body of something that had been divine and had chosen to become grotesque, and I felt sick, because this changed everything. We were not just fighting orcs, not just fighting corrupted beasts and enslaved creatures. We were fighting volunteers, divine beings who looked at Morgoth and said yes, who degraded themselves willingly, who chose darkness and mockery and evil because they believed in it. And those were the most dangerous enemies possible, because you cannot reason with belief, cannot appeal to captives who are not captives, can only fight them, kill them, and hope that when they die, their beliefs die with them. "What are they called?" someone asked. Mablung looked down at the mark on the corpse's chest. "Baldogs," he said. "That is the name they take, the title. Multiple Maia have borne it, and they are nearly as dangerous as Balrogs, nearly as terrifying. We are fortunate that Thingol was strong enough to defeat this one, because if it had won, if it had killed our king, it would have claimed Doriath, and Morgoth would have gained another kingdom." We stood there in silence, looking at the body, understanding what it meant. And then one of the warriors asked the question we were all thinking. "Are there more?" Mablung nodded slowly. "I do not know how many, but yes, there are more. Baldogs are rare, but they exist. And if Morgoth sends them against us in future battles, we will have to be ready. We'll have to hope that our leaders are strong enough to face them." Mablung took the spear, the iron spear the bulldog had wielded, examined it closely. The shaft was cracked where Thingol had struck it, but the head was intact, perfect. Black iron forged with skill that should not exist. And he said it was made in Angband by smiths who served Morgoth, and that it was a weapon too dangerous to discard, too well made to destroy. He kept it, and years later I heard he used it in the hunting of the wolf. When Carcharoth, the great wolf that had swallowed a Silmaril, was tracked through Doriath, Mablung carried that spear, the weapon of a bulldog, a Maia who had degraded itself to serve Morgoth, and it killed the wolf. And I wondered if the spear remembered what it had been, if it carried some echo of the spirit that had wielded it, or if it was just metal, just a tool, with no memory of the hand that had held it. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. You are hearing the testimony of someone who fought against Morgoth's forces, who saw the true extent of the enemy's power. If you want to hear more stories like this, more accounts from those who fought in the wars of Beleriand, then stay. Listen. Subscribe to Whispers from the Shire, because there are more battles that history has forgotten, more horrors that walked in the First Age, and their stories need to be told. Thank you. I spoke with Thingol later, days after the battle, asked him what he had felt during the duel, and he was quiet for a long time, staring at nothing, and then he said something I will never forget. "I have fought many enemies, orcs and trolls and beasts of shadow, and I have never feared them, because they are what they are, creatures made or corrupted by Morgoth, slaves to his will. But that thing, that bulldog, it chose to be what it was, chose to degrade itself, chose to become a mockery, and that is more terrible than any corruption, because it means Morgoth does not just enslave, he convinces, he seduces, he makes servants who want to serve. And those are the most dangerous enemies, because they fight not out of fear, but out of belief. And belief is harder to kill than fear. And I understood what he meant. The bulldog had not been forced to lead that army. It had volunteered, had accepted the degradation willingly, had looked at the form of an orc and said, "Yes, that is what I will become." And it had done so proudly, with conviction, because it believed Morgoth was right, believed the Valar were wrong, believed that degradation and mockery were paths to power. And you cannot defeat that kind of belief with reason, with appeals to compassion or morality. You can only meet it with force, kill the believer, and hope the belief dies with them. The war continued after that battle, more raids, more skirmishes along our borders, but we never saw another bulldog. Not in my service. And I do not know if that is because Morgoth recalled them, or because they were rare enough that deploying one was a strategic decision he made carefully, or because the one we killed had been the only one assigned to our region. But I remained vigilant, watched for signs of orc captains who were too tall, too skilled, too commanding, because I knew they existed, knew that somewhere other Baldogs walked, led other armies, fought other battles, and if we faced them again, we would need to be ready. I am old now, have lived for thousands of years since that battle. The First Age ended. Morgoth was defeated, cast into the void by the Valar. His forces were scattered. The Balrogs were destroyed or fled into deep places, and the Baldogs disappeared. I do not know what happened to them, whether they were killed in the final battles, whether they took new forms and fled, whether they simply ceased to exist when Morgoth fell. But I hope they are gone. Hope that those Maia who chose degradation are no longer in the world. Because if they survive, if they endure in some form, they are still dangerous, still believers, still servants of darkness even if their master is gone. I saw a bulldog lead an army, saw it command orcs with skill and power that should not exist, saw my king fight it in single combat, and saw it die, saw the light leave its body, saw the spirit that had animated it flee or disperse. And I learned something that day. I learned that evil is not always forced, not always the result of corruption or slavery. Sometimes it is chosen. Sometimes beings of power and intelligence and potential look at darkness and say yes, say they want to serve it, or say they will degrade themselves to prove their loyalty. And those servants are the most dangerous, because they believe, because they fight not out of fear, but out of conviction. And you cannot reason with conviction, can only meet it with force. The Baldogs were Maia in orc form, divine spirits who degraded themselves willingly, who took shapes of mockery to lead Morgoth's armies. And they were nearly as terrifying as the Balrogs. Not because they were as powerful, but because they chose what they became. And that choice, that willing embrace of degradation, that is more terrible than any corruption, because it means Morgoth did not just break his servants. He convinced them, made them believers, made them volunteers. And defeating volunteers is harder than defeating slaves, because slaves can be freed, but believers can only be killed. And even then, their beliefs might endure, might spread, might find new hosts in new ages. I am Celegorn. I fought in the Battle of the North Marches. I saw a bulldog. I watched it duel my king, and I saw it die. And I am telling you this so you know, so you understand, that if you ever face something that looks like an orc, but is wrong, too tall, too skilled, too powerful, do not face it alone. Call for help. Gather your strongest warriors. Because you are not facing an orc, you are facing a Maia, a divine being wearing orc shape, a servant nearly as terrifying as the Balrogs themselves, and defeating it will require everything you have. And even then, you might die trying. That is what I learned. That is what I carry. And that is what I am telling you now. So the knowledge endures. So we are never surprised again. Because the Baldogs were real, and they were nearly as terrifying as the Balrogs, and we must never forget